Hi, everyone. Welcome. We will get started in just a few minutes. If you would, go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat box and let us know if you're here with a nonprofit today. Hi, Sandy. Hi, Felicia. Good morning, Jackie. Hi, Melinda. Hi, Joanna. All right, we will go ahead and get started. We have a full hour planned for us today. Go ahead and continue to introduce yourself in the chat box while we get started. But I want to thank you all for choosing to be here today. As a note, we are recording this session and it will be available on our YouTube channel and on our app at the end of the day today. Before we get started, I do want to give you a quick chamber update, just a few of our upcoming events. The first, of course, is Flavor of Wayne County, happening next Friday on top of the Richmond parking garage. Tickets are available now if you are interested, and I will post that link in just a few minutes to purchase tickets. This is going to be a fun night. The band is a lot of fun, and we have some great restaurants signed up. Next, I want to remind you of our next business education luncheon. This one will be in person. It feels good to be back in person. This one will be the last of a three-part series on diversity, and this will be hosted by L. Mark Charles from Belden Incorporated. Elle is actually flying in from Portland, Oregon to teach this session. She has implemented a new culture at Belden, and I know that's something that a lot of businesses are learning to do to shift their culture and really address some of the long-term problems that we've seen. So this is going to be a phenomenal session. If you haven't already registered, go ahead and do so now. And then, of course, our upcoming chamber golf outing is on June 3rd at Forest Hills. Registration is open now. We would love to have you there. We have 2 tee times this year, again, one at 8 a.m. and one at 1 p.m. And so we will have a full day of golf available for everyone who wants to participate. I will post the link for registrations in just a few minutes for those. But I'm excited to announce today our guest speakers, and we're going to kick it off with Twana Cheek from BradyWare RKN.
Well, good morning. Well, welcome to BradyWare's presentation of the roles and responsibilities of nonprofit board members. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can go along with the PowerPoint presentation. Get a nod from somebody that I can see that you can see that. Very good. As I said, I'm Twana Cheek, Director of BradyWare's nonprofit practice. If you don't know anything about us, BradyWare serves more than 150 nonprofit organizations across 4 offices and across 3 states. So we have a dedicated team. We have members who work a lot, very significantly on tax issues, accounting issues, strategic and operational issues, very unique to the nonprofit industry and organization. And I'm joined today by Bob Reynolds, Director, and Chelsea Detling, Manager, who are also going to go through subsequent sections of the presentation. So today what we are going to do, let's see if I can talk and advance slides at the same time. Apparently not. Okay, here we go. Today we're going to go through 3 areas about being a board member for a nonprofit organization, basically the role, the responsibilities, and agreeing to serve. Now the questions, we're really going to just intermingle with each of the sections. So we can obviously answer questions at the end, but we're going to try to address questions after each section. So I encourage you to, as you think of something, put it in the chat box. Roxy's going to be monitoring that, and we will try to answer your questions as we go along. So we're going to move right into it. So the role of a board member. It's really simple. It sounds simple, but it's not. It's more than putting your name on a piece of paper or a board member listing. It's so much more. So what we're going to go through are what are those responsibilities of that role. So as a board member of a nonprofit organization, you're a fiduciary, and that you're responsible for making sure the organization has a sustainable future. You're responsible for making sure that the organization has strong ethical, financial management, and governance policies. And you're responsible for making sure an organization has adequate resources to fulfill the mission. So what does fiduciary mean? I mean, it's a kind of a big word. We've all heard it before, but we may not really know the definition of that. Bottom line, it requires a board member to stay objective, to be unselfish, to be responsible, honest, trustworthy, and efficient. You are stewards of the public trust. Remember, nonprofit organizations are not privately, held entities that are owned by someone. These are really for the benefit of the public. So in this role, we're looking about exercising reasonable care in all of the decision making without placing the organization under unnecessary risk. Now it's interesting, the states have different oversight agencies or oversight responsibility. In the state of Indiana, the Attorney General is responsible for oversight of nonprofits, and really they can step in on a lot of things if they need to have a dissolution of and I cannot pronounce that word correctly, of a not-for-profit. If they have to appoint receivers or custodians, or if they have to remove or replace directors, any complaints regarding misuse of funds, that's all governed by the Attorney General. So although you don't really see that in the bylaws or the Articles of Incorporation, Indiana law governs that, and that's how that is structured. Okay, we'll make it simple. And then as we're going along, we'll probably finish this and you're probably going to say, wow, I don't think I want to be a board of director for anything because it's a lot of responsibility. But at the end of the day, you really have three responsibilities: a duty of care, a duty of loyalty, and a duty of obedience. So let's go into the duty of care. Under the duty of care, board members must take care of the organization by making sure that its assets, including facilities, people, and goodwill, are being used in an appropriate and prudent manner. Now, this is tricky because I will just tell you, when I work with a lot of nonprofit organizations, and if I would talk with a lot of board members, I'd probably get the responses that, well, that's the responsibility of the executive director, or that's the responsibility of our head management. I'm going to tell you right now, this is the responsibility of you as a board of director for a not-for-profit. Yes, you want a great executive director who's going to be able to handle all of that and report on that. But ultimately, the responsibility is with the board of directors. So every decision, and I say this, and please don't, you'd have board of directors meetings that would last 6 hours or 10 hours if you went to the nth degree on every single one of these. So use judgment in there. But basically, every decision that the board of directors makes should be within the confines of the authority granted to the board. And that's documented in the Articles of Incorporation and in your bylaws. And the decision should be made after reviewing all pertinent information and conducting reasonable due diligence. If needed, it's supported by the advice of experts. And at the bottom line, it's reasonably believed to be in the best interest of the organization. Now, does this mean that your decisions have to be perfect and that you as a board or a board member aren't going to make are not going to make mistakes? No, you are only going to be held accountable for if you don't go through that process. So really the bar is to do what a reasonable person would do. All right, moving on to duty of loyalty. So a board member must make certain that the organization's activities and financial transactions are advancing its mission. Identify and disclose conflict of interest. Ensue decisions are in the best interest of the organization. And this is in italics, but this is really important. Not in the best interest of a board member or another individual or for-profit entity. We say that and you would read that and you would say, of course that should be. But I will tell you, Bob and Chelsea on the phone and on this call and others maybe have seen really bad examples of where this has not happened. And you say, of course she should have the best interest of the organization in mind. But sometimes that little green monster, rears its ugly head. And as a board member, you might be making decisions that are not best for the organization, but might be best for you. One thing that is really, really important here, if you're looking at a board of directors, if you're an organization, you need to have a conflict of interest policy. If you actually file a 990, a long form, not the short form, one of the questions that the IRS asks you is, do you have a conflict of interest policy? You mark a yes or a no. And they are looking for this as a good governance type of item. So if your organization does not have a conflict of interest policy, reach out to one of us, Bob, me, or Chelsea. We can get you a sample to put in place. But along with that, having a policy in place that you're not doing anything with really has no benefit to the organization. So you really should have annual statements from your board members as far as disclosure of any conflict of interest. Now, I will tell you, sometimes having a board member that maybe has a business or something may be very beneficial to the organization. You might be providing goods or services at a discounted rate, and that's really good. But you need to have those things documented to avoid an appearance of impropriety, even though you're thinking, I'm trying to do something good. Others could view that as you're self-dealing or you're giving a benefit to yourself. All right. Duty of obedience. This last section is asking board members to make certain that the organization obey applicable laws and regulations, follow its bylaws, and most importantly, that the organization adheres to its stated mission. Now, I will tell you, a lot of times we find folks on boards that really have a passion for the mission. We have great nonprofits in our area. We're doing a lot of great things in the Wayne County area. But it's really important not only to be knowledgeable about the mission and what you're doing, but to be knowledgeable about the rules that you're subject to. So if you're serving as a board of director, please pull out those bylaws, read those. If you're subject to specific rules regarding, the type of industry or the type of service that you're providing, educate yourself on what those are, because we want to make sure that the organization is following those things. And again, we want to make sure that what we're doing actually adheres to the stated mission. Now, and we're not asking you or telling you that you have a full-time job and you're becoming basically the role of the executive director. What you would want and hope is that your board would have educational pieces to educate the entire board as a whole and go through these items with you. But be careful on this, that you're just not looking at the mission. The mission is super important, but we've all seen examples of where we have the best intentions in the world, but we don't carry through on some of the administrative pieces that are important. And then that's a failure for the organization. One other last comment here, and this is just an aside. You know, I've probably already scared you off, and we haven't even gotten to Bob or Chelsea's part as far as serving as a board of director for a not-for-profit. But I said before, your answers don't have to be perfect. You don't have to feel the pressure that you are expected to have perfection. You are expected to be prudent and to think about that, and to be loyal and to be ethical. One thing that's really important, I would tell you, me personally, I would not serve on a board of directors for a nonprofit unless the organization had a directors and officers insurance policy. And what that does, it's not expensive. I've seen large organizations and their premiums. I mean, I don't care if you're a small organization and have a shoestring budget or a very large not-for-profit organization. This is a very important policy, insurance policy, and it protects you as a board of director and your role, because you're volunteering and giving your time, but this policy would help protect you in what you are trying to accomplish and with your service to the organization. Roxy, what questions do we have?
All right, first question we have is, would you recommend the board chair or president announce for people with conflicts to identify prior to discussing certain decisions? Or is it on the board member to stop the conversation and excuse themselves, or both?
I think that depends on the situation, because hopefully you've already disclosed something, you know, in the statement. But regardless, I would say, let me just use the example of an organization's going to renovate something, and they've gone out for 3 bids from, you know, different construction companies, you know, in the area. I think it is very important that the board member, let's say they own the construction company, one of them, they may have the lowest bid because, like I said before, they may be doing something that they want to benefit the organization. But it needs to be very clear to the board that this is a related party, you know, transaction. And so they do need to be made aware of that. Furthermore, that individual actually should be excused from the room. They should not be part of that discussion. And I strongly recommend that your minutes document that, because what that's doing, it's basically creating a barrier there, and your other board members are acknowledging, yes, we do have a related party, you know, situation. We are going to take that into consideration when we are making our decision on this.
I think that's the only question we have now. If you have more for Tawana or any of our other speakers, please drop them into the chat box.
Great. Well, I'm going to mute myself and I'm going to turn it over to Bob Reynolds then.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. We're glad to have you here with us. And Tawana has shared with you what we tend to view as sort of the overarching or 30,000-foot level of, you know, a board member, conceptually what your role is. As she mentioned, it's important if you're serving on a board that you realize that, she mentioned the Attorney General and that governing body, if you will, changes from state to state. But a lot of people don't know when you sign on to be a board member that you actually have certain legal responsibilities, and that's kind of the things that Tawana was sharing. What I'm going to spend a few minutes talking to you about are basically just some of the basic things that you would be required or asked to do as a board member. This is kind of more, I would call, the nuts and bolts of what you can expect to do on an ongoing or recurring basis once you've joined the board. Should go without saying, I think most of us know one of the important responsibility of the board is to establish an actionable mission and a vision for the organization. Typically, most boards will go through a periodic strategic planning process, and part of that process would be to revisit, you know, what is our mission? And I always like to say, really what a mission should be, or a mission statement should tell the world is, as an organization, why do we exist? It should answer that question. That's the easiest guidance we can provide you. It should be actionable. We would encourage you that it should be brief. We see this a lot I've seen it a lot over the years with organizations in their mission statement. They start out by saying, we want to cure cancer. Great mission, it's inspirational, it's big, it certainly points a vision for how we are going to approach the service that we provide. But then we all too often drift into adding to that mission statement how we're going to do it. The how we're going to do it really isn't your mission. Those are basically how we're going to do it is your response to the strategic goals and objectives that you set. Your mission statement really should be that rallying cry about why do we exist and what are we trying to accomplish. So again, Tawana and Chelsea know this. I'm real fond of saying less is best. I mean, if you can state your mission in one sentence, you've done an outstanding job. If you have 15 sentences or 5 paragraphs on your website that this is our mission, you probably need to go back and spend some time revisiting that. Another basic responsibility is the board is responsible for hiring the chief executive. Now that should be pretty self-evident. You hire the director. You're responsible to support them. You are the resource, to help them do their job. And a very important resource. You also are responsible for evaluating their performance and determining their compensation. Now, just real quick on determining their compensation, Tawana mentioned the long form 990. The IRS is very interested in how you arrived at the process you used to arrive at how do we pay our chief executive. You should be doing some type of evaluation on an annual basis of their performance. Compensation should be linked to their performance, the accomplishment of whatever goals the board has established for the chief executive. But more importantly, we need to look outside the organization to make sure that whatever we do to, as far as compensation goes, that it's reasonable given the market. So, and the easiest way to look at it this way is it comparable with what other directors in the area are being paid? We run into an issue a lot of times where in places like rural Indiana or even in Wayne County, there's sometimes this misnotion, if you will, that we have to compensate our chief executive real low because of the standard of living or the average wages in Wayne County or our geographic area. You just need to have a process, and it needs to be comparable, but you can't overlook what skill sets are needed for the position. And we've heard it for years. Many of you may have heard this. For example, our local hospital, Reed Hospital. Reed Hospital, if they want the very best in medical professionals and in physicians, they may have to pay a little bit more than, say, Dayton, Ohio, to attract that talent because of the nature, of our community. So the most important thing is you want to find the chief executive that's right for the organization, and you need to have a process, and Tawana mentioned this very well several times. You need to have a process that you arrived at a decision on what to pay them that is something that is prudent and what a reasonable person would do. So don't automatically just lock into the fact that if you're in a lower income type of area that you have to pay your executive director, a very low salary. The board members also, you should be on some type of either annual or periodic basis you need to develop a strategic plan that includes near-term and longer-term goals, a process for monitoring the achievement of those goals, and more importantly, a process for modifying our direction when the world around us changes. The board sets the strategic plan, strategic direction for the exec. Often we see in organizations where that strategic plan and planning for the future kind of gets put on the shoulders of the chief executive, you know, to sort of, we need to develop this, you need to develop this, and then tell us what to do. That's really not how the rules are designed. You're the ones, as Tawana said, responsible for making sure we're doing what's right for the greater good. And it's your responsibility to establish that strategic direction. It's the chief executive's responsibility to execute the plan, not to own the plan. Next slide, please, Tawana. Okay, this one here, we get mixed reviews when we bring this up. But if you're on a board, you should expect to be held accountable in some fashion to assist with fundraising. Tawana mentioned we have a responsibility, you know, an overarching responsibility to make sure that that the organization has the financial resources to carry out its mission. So I like to say when I'm working with boards, when it comes to fundraising, nobody gets to sit on the bench. There's a role everyone can play. Yeah, and that role could be helping with an event. It could be making introductions to potential donors. It could be writing thank you letters, to existing donors, thanking them for their support. You know, that comes back to that whole notion in those three hierarching categories. You need to be an advocate for the organization, and part of that advocacy is you need to be helping to secure money, helping to open doors, helping to contribute financially. We also stress it's important that every member on the board, in our opinion, every member in the board has to make a financial commitment to the organization. Now, we've worked with organizations where the board defines what that dollar amount of the gift should be. I don't think we're heavy-duty proponents of doing that because not every board member has the same financial capacity, but there should be an expectation that you will, as a board member, will give what is reasonable for you, what is substantial to you. So, you know, if it's substantial to you to make $100 gift, make $100 gift. If you have the means to make $100,000 gift, well, that's your choice. But we certainly would not recommend, you know, setting the bar. Although I will add anecdotally, I have been on 3 or 4 boards over my career that when I signed on as a board member, I also signed a financial commitment statement that said, you know, here's exactly what you need to bring to the table. The board also has a responsibility, and you could be asked to participate in this, and Tawana kind of touched on it, to have a process where the board is expanding or increasing its knowledge of the environment in which the organization operates, its knowledge about programs. You know, so there should be some type of ongoing training process for the board. Like any other business, any other situation, if you're making strategic and financial decisions, you need to do your homework and sort of to make sure that you're making reasonable and prudent and good financial decisions. So there should be a board training program to enhance performance. The board is responsible, and this comes back, the 3 of us are all auditors. This comes back to a core thing that we look for. The board is responsible for establishing internal controls, financial controls, operational controls. there is often a big misunderstanding there that the chief executive is responsible for, I'll call it, watching the cookie jar. That is wrong. They certainly should have a role in how what's in the cookie jar is being used, but putting the process and the controls in place on how we make decisions, how we monitor purchases, how we look at, our interactions with donors or granting agencies, there has to be those processes and those checks and balances in place. And it's very important, if you're a board member, that you understand that's your responsibility to establish those and to monitor their effectiveness on an ongoing basis. And we've all seen, well, I know the three of us have seen too many in our collective careers, instances where fraud or the misuse of funds or something has taken place, or programs have not been administered correctly. The organization ends up taking a step backward. Obviously, it hurts the organization, but more importantly, it can cause a little bit of trouble for you as a board member. We have a saying that your job as a board member is to make sure things are being done correctly and somebody's keeping an eye on the cookie jar, because the last place you want to be in a community the size of Richmond, Indiana, is to have your name above the fold on the front page saying that you as a board member were asleep at the wheel when Joe Blow walked off with $500,000 from your organization. That's your responsibility. You're also responsible to be an advocate. If you've joined the board and you're doing what's necessary to advance the mission, you have a responsibility to understand.
Hey, John, I gotta go.
Okay.
Okay.
Slide mic. But you have a responsibility to be an advocate for the organization. You want to help build community relationships. You want to help educate the community about the value and the role that the organization plays. One thing that we recommend is that the board, as a group, go through the exercise like a lot of service providers or vendors do. Come up with your 30-second elevator speech. I'm on the board of such and such an organization. Here's what we do. Here's who we serve. Here's the outcome. Here's why it's important to you as a community member to support us. Next slide, please. Tawana, it doesn't look like it advanced.
I know, and I don't know why. So keep talking and I'll try to figure out why I'm not advancing.
Well, Bob, I have a question.
Sure.
So when you're talking about all these legal responsibilities of a board member, should every board have legal representation, and should they be attending meetings frequently?
Well, let's answer the first question. Yes, it probably would be beneficial that the organization have some type of legal registration. Now, what representation, how it form that takes can be very different. A lot of smaller organizations may use volunteer type of legal resources. I know, for example, in the Dayton, Ohio market, they have the pro bono partnership, and really it's a 501c3 that collectively brings together attorneys that on an as-need basis will provide legal services to a nonprofit, free of charge. We have a lot of clients, for example, that have attorneys on the board, and they actually donate their time. But I guess the short answer is yes, they should have, as part of the skill mix, if you will, in their board members and their volunteers, someone that has a legal background or perhaps a regulatory and compliance background if you're in a segment in the nonprofit world that's heavily driven by regulation, and typically we see a lot of that with health and human service providers. because they're getting money from the state, they're getting money from local boards, that handle various programs on behalf of the state. Do those legal folks need to attend the board meeting? So I would be very hesitant to say that that's a requirement. I think what's more important is when in doubt, or if we're doing something new, what the board should do is either someone from the executive leadership of the board or the executive director. If we're contemplating a big transaction, we're contemplating a new program. If we have any concern at all that there are legal things associated with that, someone needs to follow up with legal counsel. I would be hesitant to say, yes, you have to have an attorney, and yes, they have to be at every board meeting. We talked about increasing the knowledge of the organization's programs, services, and policies. That's going to be an expectation, we think, for every board member. Now, this is an area here where there's a sort of a collaboration between the board and the chief exec. Is your chief exec and probably their program individuals are the ones that should be most up to speed on what's going on in their particular world. And then the board, it should be responsible for designing some type of training, or ongoing process when they get together to visit and update the board on what's changing in our industry, what changes are coming with respect to funding streams or compliance requirements for programs. Because again, we're responsible as a board member for making sure the organization is doing what it's supposed to be doing. You're obviously, some of these are going to be pretty self-evident. You're going to be required as a board member to attend board meetings. Most often, every board member is asked to be on a committee. And those committees can take all kinds of shapes and forms. If you're involved with an organization that does a lot of fundraising events, I can tell you from personal experience, be prepared to be asked to, number one, attend the event. Number two, if you're a business owner, you're probably going to get asked, can you convince your business to support the event? If necessary, you're going to be asked to roll up your sleeves and actually help. So just be aware of that. You may be called upon on an ad hoc basis to participate in special committee meetings or things that are unanticipated. Probably the one I've seen the most often is if there's a change in leadership, some group on the board is going to have to get together. As we said, you're responsible for hiring the exec. So you could be asked to serve on a search committee, to actually deal with an unanticipated departure, the executive director, certainly, for planned succession and things like that. This one here is should be very evident, but I think if we're all honest with one another, sometimes this final bullet point is the one that I'm sure is most aggravating at times to board chairs and executive directors. Board members show up at the board meeting and they're unprepared. I know every organization on this call probably sends out a financial statement, a set of minutes from the last board meeting, other materials to deal with, things that we're going to make decisions upon. I know I've chaired a few boards over the years. You're sitting there with the gavel, if you will, at the head of the table, and you say, okay, you've all been supplied the board minutes. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes? And then suddenly it's crickets. And if you look around the table, what's going on? 3/4 of the board members are trying to read the minutes at the same time we're calling for the vote. Please come to be engaged. The one thing I think organizations too often sort of fall victim to is the board is unprepared. They don't review materials ahead of time. So we spend too much time during our actual time while we're together trying to take care of these administrative functions, approving minutes, approving a financial statement, and the like. We're also guilty, and this might be more on the internal leadership side. You know, we want to have the executive director give a report, then we want to hear a report from the program committee manager, someone from the development area. We got a 1-hour board meeting, and it takes us 55 minutes to get through the static stuff that we're going to review every month. How much time are we left to focus on the things we've already talked about? Decision making, direction, strategy, utilization of our resources. I don't mean to sound cavalier or flip, but I'm at a point in my life, the first thing I ask if I'm asked to serve on a board is, do we utilize the consent agenda and describe for me a current board meeting? And if the board meeting is, as I just described, it's predominantly asking a group of well-intended volunteers to come into a boardroom and sit there for an hour and listen to reports, respectfully, I will tell you I have better things to do with my time. I'm not here to listen to reports. I'm here to do something in support of the mission. So please focus on that. We are big proponents. There ought to be a consent agenda, and this kind of ongoing business types of decisions should be done and out of the way, my opinion, in no more than 10 minutes. And then we have 50 minutes to talk about our impact and what we're going to do in the future and how we're going to take care of the people we serve and bring value to our community. If you can't get there, you're misusing the time and the talent of the people that you've asked to sit around the boardroom table. Next slide. We talked about task force. To me, a difference between the task force and the committee. Task force have a definite and finite shelf life. We give them something to do. Once it's done, we disband the committee or the task force, and we don't ask the volunteers for more time. You're going to be required to look at financial statements and tax returns. You're going to be required to bring on and provide for an orderly transition of board members. And I would encourage you, if you're a board, it's the board's responsibility to recruit successor board members. And usually the telltale sign, and the best example I can give is I teach a course at the University of Dayton for MBA students. And I had a speaker come in to speak to our class once, a very predominant executive director in the nonprofit community in Dayton. And every time she referred to the board, she referred to them as my board. And by the time she was done talking, it was pretty evident for myself and the students who were in attendance that she hand selected her board members. And she was not at all embarrassed by it. It was like, this is what I need for what I want to do. So I'm going to ask Tawana to serve because she's willing to let me do my job and her job. Real slippery slope, in my opinion. There needs to be a separation between the executive board and in today's time, you know, the board is the one that needs to be focused on how do we support the executive director and the organization to bring diversity into our boardroom, you know, into our employment ranks and our volunteer pool. I think that might be the end. It is. So next slide, Tawana, would be where we get ready to kick it over to Chelsea. But Roxy, do we have any questions?
We don't have any questions in the chat box right now. If you have questions, please drop them so that we can make sure to get those answered.
Okay, well, we're gonna move this over to Chelsea, and this is probably, you know, if we have folks on the call that are contemplating becoming board members, this is probably going to be very, very important to you. So, Chelsea, good morning, and take it from here.
All right, thank you, Bob. The next couple of slides, we're going to go over a few items that are areas that you should consider asking or thinking about before you agree to serve on the board. First item, are you passionate about the organization's mission? If you don't feel the connection, it's very easy to say that you're busy, so you're going to have to miss the next board meeting. It should be okay because other people will be in attendance. Everybody's time is precious. If you're not going to participate, then don't sign up. What kind of programs does the organization offer? Before you say yes to serving on the board, visit their website and do some research. See what kind of programs they offer, who they serve, get to know the organization. Is it a working board or a governing board? Know what you're getting into. Will you have a more of a working role as a board member, such as having responsibility to review documents, sign off on documents? Are you going to have to do that on a weekly basis? Know what you're getting into. Who are the current board members? Ask to see a more recent board member listing. Ask if there's any term limits for serving on the board. What is the time commitment? How often does the board meet? Are they meeting on a monthly basis, every other month, quarterly basis? As long with the meetings too, are you responsible to do any other kind of work for the organization that would require some time? And if you do have the passion, but learn that you just don't have the time to serve on the board, then write a check. What is the expected financial commitment? So Bob had mentioned in his presentation that boards require their board members to donate to the organization. See what the expectation is for that organization you're considering joining. Next slide. Will you be expected to serve on a committee? So the board, there could be separate committees that would require separate meetings. Check to see if, as a board member, you would be required to serve on a committee as well. And if so, ask what that time commitment would be. Ask to see the following documents. Does the organization have a strategic plan? If so, ask if you can see that. Ask to see a most recent copy of the internal financial statements so you can see what kind of financial position the organization is in. Ask to see a typical board meeting agenda. Bob kind of mentioned this already in his presentation, but this just helps you to see how the meetings are ran. Are you going to be listening to more reports and updates, or are you going to have more of an interactive role as a board member? Ask to see the organization's bylaws. And then Tawana also mentioned this in her presentation, but it's very important to see, does the organization have directors and officers insurance? And really, this is really important because it helps protect the personal assets of directors and board members in the event that they're personally sued. Any questions on this section?
Can you talk a little bit about term limits and understanding what those mean? If you're looking to go, that's something I get asked a lot. They've asked me to serve a 1-year term, but at the end of that 1-year term, are they going to ask me to do a 5-year term or a 3-year term after that?
Bob, do you have any input on this?
You're muted, Bob.
I've decided I want to market and t-shirts that says you're on mute. If we all remember the old yellow happy face, I think that's the key to getting rich in retirement. I'm going to sell you're on mute t-shirts. Great question, Roxy. I believe I can speak for at least from our position, the way most of us in the nonprofit practice at BradyWare, we are. I don't care if it's school boards or politics or whatever. There is a benefit to term limits. I mean, yeah, it's good if you're trying to achieve diversity, diversity in thought, diversity, in any other type of metric. An organization's going to thrive if it has an orderly transition of leadership. You want to attract and have, fresh faces and new ideas, in the boardroom. Beyond this, there's no magical answer. What I think we see most in practice is we'll see organizations that have no term limits, or if they have term limits, it's usually perhaps a 2 or 3 year term to serve on the board. And then the number of consecutive terms that you can serve is limited. So you can serve 3 2-year terms and then you have to leave, 2 3-year terms and you have to go. Most 1-year terms when it comes to, I think, the board leadership, and I'll ask Tawana to speak to this if she disagrees, that tends to be most effective when you're talking about board officers. I don't know that you want massive turnover year to year in the board as a whole.
You're going to be spending a lot of time educating if you're doing that kind of turnover that quickly. The other thing that I just want to jump in and say is that, when you're committing to be a board, every organization has their different terms. There's no right or wrong in that per se, but never feel like you are locked into that board. I mean, you're committed to a certain term, but you may have personal issues that arise where you are not able to fulfill what you believe you think you need to do. We see that, resignations all the time. If another reason for resignation, and this is not a good one, but if you feel you're in a bad spot with the organization and they are not doing things that you feel should be done in a prudent manner, then I would strongly suggest that you work with them. But basically, if you can't resolve the issue, to basically tender your resignation. Because remember, everything that we've talked about, you're putting your name along with that as far as responsibility. So there's always a fine line between fulfilling commitments, but then knowing sometimes you really can't, or sometimes you shouldn't.
Just a final comment, and I usually get accused of being the conspiracy theorist or the bearer of bad news all the time. But the counter to what Tawana just said is, if you have a board member who is not meeting expectations, your board needs to have a policy. We're not going to let them ride the bench for 3 years. We're simply going to ask them to leave. So we talked a lot about the responsibility for the board to monitor outcomes and the performance of the chief executive. It's also equally important that the board assess its behavior, and are they meeting expectations on an annual basis? I mean, a lot of boards that I've served on, you're asked to do and submit a self-evaluation, each year. Typically you do that, you reaffirm, you sign a statement that I've read, and reaffirm my understanding of our bylaws and my role. And then your executive committee, your officers, the executive, the board chair, the vice chair, the secretary, treasurer, those positions, any ad hoc members, if you will, of sort of that senior leadership group. It's a good practice to have them go through those self-evaluations to say, Bob says he's the greatest board member, there ever was, but we had 12 meetings last year and he showed up for 3. Maybe we tell Bob, if we're going to take a look halfway through next year, and if you've only been here once, we're probably going to ask you to leave. And you don't have to be nasty about firing them. You really need to look at it from the standpoint of it's right for the organization and it's really right for the individual. Because if you're not showing up, your absence is going to be noticed, and these usually are well-intentioned people in the community, and we don't want to embarrass you. And I know as a board chair in my career, I've had a few conversations where I've had to tell a board member, it probably, you're up to move to your next term, or we're sort of at the end of our fiscal year. I think you probably ought to consider, rolling off the board. We know you mean well, but it just doesn't seem to be working, and we don't want, we got to do what's right for the organization. We certainly don't want to call you out. And that's the important thing. I would never call out a board member in an open meeting to have that that kind of discussion. That should happen between the board chair and the board member. The executive director shouldn't be involved. Yeah, it's a volunteer to volunteer. You know, we have to hold one another accountable. Anything else?
Too, be careful if you're serving as a board member. Don't spread yourself too thin. If you're serving on 10 different boards, I would challenge you to ask how effective you are. It's great that you can put that on your resume that you're on all these boards, but again, I would question you as far as how effective you are and what you're really giving to that organization. I cut off a few people, so go jump in.
Melissa, go ahead. I think we had the same thought.
Okay, so I wanted to follow up with what you said, Bob, and that I really love the idea of having conversations on the side with people, and hopefully they admit that it's time for them to roll off the board. But in a situation where there is a need to actually vote somebody off of the board, I just want to encourage people for those bigger decisions. You know, it could be that, it could be making a budgetary decision outside of the annual approved budget or whatever those things are. That's why you need to be familiar with your bylaws. And I will admit, when I first started serving on boards, I had no idea the value the bylaws held. And boards can easily get themselves into trouble by, you know, passing a motion with majority instead of 2/3 or whatever that might be that the bylaws requires.
Thank you for that. I guess what Tawana and Chelsea and I are saying is you got to do what's right for the organization. You need to do what's, if nothing else, what's humane for the volunteer. So those conversations should be handled, you know, with a certain degree of sensitivity to the situation. I always say that the right outcome is the volunteer agrees to resign, because firing a board member, you know, is not a pleasant experience. You know, I've experienced it a few times in my volunteer history. And I'll tell you, getting rid of a board member is harder than firing the executive director. Because they were my neighbors. I see them at Myers or Walmart. You know, I got to live with these people. So, you know, move forward with care. Anything else?
We have two more questions. The first one is one, I'm actually getting a lot of people asking this in my private chat. They're going, I need my board to hear this. But how do I tell them they need to hear this? Any advice on that?
Well, that's hard if you're the executive director or something like that. If you're the one sitting here saying, I need my board to hear this, that's when it might be good to bring someone outside of and just give, you know, have your board, you know, actually this is recorded. Have your board members watch something like this or go through some training on board responsibilities. It's a difficult situation when you're the executive director or the chief person in control and you're telling the board how they should be acting. That is a dynamic that you really don't want to enter into, but it's a tricky fine line.
The only thing I would add on to that is I'm not surprised you're getting that question. We do these kinds of things that we always hear. You know, I'm the exec and I came here, but unfortunately, none of my board members that should hear this are here. No blanket commitment here, but you know, we all care about what happens in our community. So if you think of things or want to bounce ideas off, you know, just reach out to one of us. You know, I never learned how to play golf. So I say I volunteer with my free time. So I know, you know, if it's, you know, if the ask is not too great and the calendars could be coordinated, there may be the possibility, you know, we could participate for a short period of time, in your board meeting and kind of reinforce these ideas, because that's the way we get back. Chelsea, I'm sorry, I'm going to steal a piece of your thing since we're getting close to the end here. But the other one would be to reach out to the three of us. If you have questions about today's subject matter, we can certainly respond, to additional questions. But I would encourage you to go out to our website, because we not only are doing today's presentation, but we do educational sessions around board and more strategic topics through our Take 5 conference, and we do sessions in the spring. We do sessions in the fall. Go to our website. We have a lot of archived presentations that we've done on these types of subjects. So they're available. There's no cost. You can look at them, or at a board meeting, put it on a projector screen and share it with your board. And sign up for our newsletter. And I have some clients I work with that the organization has signed up for the newsletter. And then when board members come on, they sign up the board members for the newsletter as well. I'm happy to say that probably most of the content has more to do with strategic things. So just because we're accountants, don't think it's going to be the latest and greatest diet of nothing but debit and credit types of things. So there are resources out there, and we're not the only one. There are nonprofit associations, that you could get information from as well. Chelsea, anything else we didn't cover?
No, just wanted to thank you all for joining us today. We would also like to thank Roxy and the Chamber for providing us opportunity to present today. And so if you think of additional questions after the presentation today, here's our contact information. You can reach out to Tawana, myself, or Bob. And then also, like Bob mentioned, please visit our website at www.BradyWare.com.
If your question wasn't answered today, or if you want more information, I highly suggest you reach out to these individuals. We will be posting the recording of this session this afternoon onto our YouTube page and then onto our social media accounts. If you go to our YouTube page, much like BradyWare, we have archived all of our webinars that we've hosted in the past, and you can check those out. You can also download the Wayne County Area Chamber of Commerce app. It is in your app store, WCACC, and all of our videos live there too. I actually, a few nights ago, wanted to listen to another one, so I popped in my headphones while I walked on the treadmill and was able to watch a webinar right there. So that's a super easy way to get a hold of our content. And we will be sharing this out with everyone this afternoon, so please stay tuned for that. Thank you to BradyWare for hosting this conversation with us today. I was surprised at the number of people who were able to attend, and I know many more want this recording. So thank you for spending some time with us. Have a great day, everyone.
See ya.